We give Hollywood a hard time for their storytelling. After watching this movie, we owe them an apology. Let's talk about Survive.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. So, today we'll be discussing or debating Survive. But before we get into that, you already know what time it is. It is time for movie recommendations. So, Mandem, what's the best recent thing that you've seen that you want to tell the people?
So mine is a TV series, and it's actually a BBC series, actually. It's called The Traitors, and I don't know if anyone's kind of like come across it, heard of it, or whatever. It's kind of like a bit of a game show where you have like 22 people that go to this castle. 3 of them are deemed traitors, and then the others are deemed as faithfuls, essentially. Basically, it's a bit of like a psychological game, like kind of like a reading game to try and figure out who the traitors are. And of course, the traitors are trying to like manipulate the other people to try and like have the faithfuls vote each other out each round. Not my typical recommendation game shows, but I don't know why it had me captivated. Just like something like the game playing, the sneakiness, and just like kind of like seeing people's like psyche and how they like kind of like analyze situations, behaviors. I don't know. I was like gripped. I was hooked onto the TV series and completely binged season 2 of it in like 1 and a bit days. It was just like great entertainment, to be honest. So that's my recommendation.
I've heard of it. I think I saw. Yeah, it was all right. It was all right. I haven't finished it though, but I might have to get back into it. But me, what did I watch? So I watched Ghosts of Mars. For people who don't know what it's about, I think it was like a Martian police force. It was sent to like pick up a criminal who was Ice Cube at a remote, it was like a mining place, right? But when they got there, the whole like everyone there, they were pretty much everyone that was on that post, they was possessed by some sort of demonic spirit that kind of like gets into your ear when you kill someone. When you kill someone, then they'll come out of you and then they'll go through your ear and then they'll possess you. Would I recommend it? I'd recommend it if you have nothing to do and you have nothing to watch. It's just one of those movies that it's cool. It was a cool film. I liked it because I was in that type of mood where I was, like that type of like Alien. If you've seen the movie Alien, but like that Alien Romulus, group of survivors, group of people trying to survive in a situation. I was just in that type of mood. So I was looking for movies with that, with that kind of story, and I came across Ghosts of Mars, and it was cool, man. It was cool. I liked it. Some people might not be fans of it, but I'd still recommend it. Give it a shot and see.
I think this one has the reputation as being John Carpenter's stupid one, but I think like it really comes down to what kind of mood you're in, right? Like it's not high art, but it's also competent.
Yeah.
Is that how to describe it?
Yeah, honestly, it's a confident film, and it depends on how you're feeling as well. So if it's a thing where you want to watch a good movie, don't watch it. But if you're just in that mood where you're binging on a bunch of stuff, like you're in a sci-fi type of mood and you're binging on, similar movies to like Aliens, for example, then I'd say watch it. It's not gonna hurt. It's just, yeah, man. It's a binge. It's a part of a binge collection film.
This week I watched Danger Close: The Battle of Long Ton, which is a 2019 Australian war movie, which essentially adapts the Battle of Long Ton, which is an event that occurred during the Vietnam War between northern Vietnamese troops and Australian troops, where essentially an Australian patrol walked into a vastly superior number of Vietnamese troops. They kind of got bogged down and almost all died, but narrowly won in the end by working together. And the movie is essentially a very faithful adaptation of the Wikipedia page of that battle, because the whole point of the movie is to recreate essentially what happened. And so there's a lot of minutia, there's a lot of, and then this happened kind of thing. But what it seems to kind of add up to is basically just an accurate picture of what it was like to live through those events. And that was basically the focus of it. And when you look up reviews of this movie, they're scathing because the movie refuses to take a side in the politics of the Vietnam War on either side of it. It just purely says this is what happened and this is what it was like to live through those events. And it does not glamorize anything. It also does not condemn anything. And a lot of people have a problem with that. And so on that level, it kind of was interesting. The most praise it gets from like military nerds and people who really know the ins and outs of how these things work. Where apparently they went to great lengths to make this authentic. So all the depictions of how things work and how people behave and stuff like that seems to be like I've seen some criticism of this movie, but you have to get really nitpicky. And if you can say that about a movie, then that's probably pretty good. And that by itself does not make it a good movie. It also tells the story well. But it basically starts off with, let's tell the story of what happened. And it really succeeds at that, I thought. And it is also a well-told story and like a good watch. But it's kind of refreshing where you can kind of just say, okay, like now I have an idea of what that was like. The Vietnam War is almost always told from the American point of view or the Vietnamese point of view, but there were other nations involved as well, and they had different experiences, especially since these were all conscripts, so these weren't like professional soldiers, these were all like just regular 18-year-olds that kind of were told to go there. And so that's part of what makes this war interesting from a story perspective, that this was the last like conscription war that a Western nation fought, and it's also very scrutinized, right? So the Vietnam War movies are kind of interesting on that level, but they're also kind of like a little bit predictable and samey. And this one just looks at it from a different angle, and I thought that was interesting. All right, Survivre is a 2024 French post-apocalyptic movie about a family that is caught up in this cosmic event in which a solar flare leads to all the oceans disappearing for a week. And they essentially have a couple of days to kind of get to safety before the water returns. And they will be crushed to death if they don't make it to safety in that time. And the story essentially follows this family of 2 parents and their 2 children who basically go from being on holiday to struggling for survival. During that time, they meet raiders and other desperate survivors and murder crabs and all sorts of different things. And that is essentially the story of Survive. So what did we think of the movie?
This movie is ridiculous, man. Let me just be like straight up. This movie was a bit of a joke. What I'm annoyed about is it kind of like teased me with a good time in terms of like its premise.
That's a perfect way to describe the movie. They should put that on the poster.
Well, what part?
They teased me with a good time.
No, pretty much, because like the whole idea of like, you know, them being on a boat and then like this particular storm happening and then like the ocean kind of like disappearing and stuff like that. You kind of just like thinking of like all the different ways that could be like interesting and like kind of like the visionary of it, the kind of like sceneries that they could like kind of like paint with it, like the storytelling like capabilities of that as well. And of course like they mentioned about like these like kind of like murderous like sea creatures and stuff like that. So you're thinking, okay, like this is going to be something interesting. They're going to be they're going to be like kind of like stalked and like preyed on by like these like sea creatures that have been like uncovered because the ocean's disappeared, and you don't really get any of it. And it's just frustrating. And I was like so confused, especially when the first like other person they meet after the whole storms happen, the first person that they meet and everything that kind of like goes down with sort of meeting this person, I was so confused. And then like even like the how many minutes afterwards, I was like, this isn't the movie I signed up for. I'm like, okay, this is all right, cool, whatever. As it progressed, like just kind of like kept like losing me. Some of the characters just making dumb choices, dumb decisions, and just like the way that people were interacting with each other anytime they came across like other people just like didn't completely like make sense as to like at all. And I feel like the biggest like crime this movie did was if you're going to be like low budget and you're not going to be able to like, you know, fully realize the threat via CGI and stuff like that, at least try to like hide your flaws, which is like low budget, and try to like maximize storytelling aspects of it, like the threat and like some of the dread and this, that, and the other. Try to like even like the anxiety and the tenseness of it. But I don't feel like it did any of that at all. And like I was just kind of just sat there watching it, wondering what the hell, like honestly, like I was just like sat there watching it thinking, this is low budget, and you don't want to have that experience when watching a low budget movie. You want to like see it as like, oh, this is where they've been creative, this is where they've made like a good choice. And yeah, I feel like the idea of the project was way too ambitious for the amount of money that they had for this, which then ultimately led to a really, really bad movie, in my opinion. So that's my thoughts.
I think what made this film look low budget, it actually wasn't the actual look of the film or the locations or the CGI. It was actually the way that the story was told. Now, overall, I wasn't mad at my experience with this film because it had its moments. But unfortunately, this was just too big enough idea to pull off as a whole. It just lacked cohesiveness, man. The story structure needed like rearranging, and they, you know what I'm saying, and the performance and chemistry was lacking. It was unfortunate because it had, like I said, it had moments where I thought, okay, it's getting there. You know what I'm saying? But then it just regressed again. I was like, damn. And then there'll be moments again, I was like, okay, it's getting interesting again, especially like during the heated exchanges between the mum and the daughter. I was thinking, okay, it's getting a bit heated. I'm getting more engaged, but then some crazy stuff would happen. So I'm gonna go into the problems of the film later on. But overall, just like a feel of it, I'm not angry at this film. I'm not gonna say it's the worst film I've seen so far this year, even though this year has just kind of started. But it was, yeah, I just think it was too much of a big idea. Like the idea was just too big for it to be executed. A wacky idea can be executed, but unfortunately, he didn't. Whoever the director was, they didn't manage to execute this idea. Unfortunately, I give them credit though for trying because. You know what I'm saying? When I obviously saw the trailer and I saw the song, I was like, oh, okay, that's pretty interesting. Like even Daniel was the one that introduced us to this film. So like, okay, that's pretty interesting. But then at first, the first half of the film is pretty much what they sold us. It's like they said, it felt like you're watching a whole completely different movie because you didn't know who the hell the antagonist was. Like when I saw the first half of the film, the antagonist is not the crabs. That's not the main threat. You know what I'm saying? Let's just say that before we get into spoilers.
So I don't know. I did not go in expecting very much. I just like I've watched low budget movies that have a lot of heart or at least some energy, and I can get enjoyment out of essentially people walking around the desert for 2 hours, right? Acting does not cost anything really. Like once you've got your actors, having them say better lines does not cost much. You can cobble something together with very little budget, right? And especially in the post-apocalyptic genre, like there's a reason why that genre is so popular, because you can basically drive an hour into the countryside and you can shoot your post-apocalyptic movie depending on where you are. This movie just does everything wrong on every level. I didn't even pay attention to the premise. I knew the premise was going to be stupid, but what's potentially interesting is what comes after, right? You can be funny, you can be exciting, you can be dramatic, you can be tragic, you can be action-packed. Like there's any number of things you can do with a stupid premise. And this movie did none of them. It's just people doing stuff for 90 minutes. That's about it. Like there's no story structure to it. There's no theme to it. There's no point to it. It's just people doing one thing after another. It's very linear and it's very basic. And that by itself is something I tend to like in movies. But they did only the obvious thing. And they did that pretty poorly. So I would not recommend watching this movie, even if it's for free. There's better ways to spend 90 minutes of your time. But I think it's interesting to see like why would somebody actually make a movie like this, or why exactly does it not work? Maybe we can touch on some of that in the next hour. So let's talk about it.
When I saw this film, I thought it was made like by someone. This was like their first movie.
Have you looked at the credits?
No, I haven't looked at it.
Two writers in this. One of them has 10 years of experience. The other has 20 years. These are not first-time writers. And I haven't checked the director. Give me a second. The first movie this guy directed, it was in 1994. This is made by people who know what they're doing, or at least have had enough time to learn. So that's not the answer. This is not like a student film. This is not like somebody who bit off more than they can chew. This is seasoned movie makers doing something that does everything wrong and seemingly does not understand what a story is.
Okay, so where did they go so wrong with this film? I might as well just get straight into it.
It's completely devoid of any kind of point, right? So just as an example, the father is an oceanographer. I think the only contribution he makes is he gets coordinates from the other scientist, and so he marks on a map where the submarine is that's sitting kind of on the ocean floor, and then he dies because they encounter like a radar, and the guy kills him for a bottle of water, right? Even though the world ended hours ago, and that's awful fast for all of civilization to collapse. But okay, it's a post-apocalyptic movie, so we have to have radars, right? So we get a radar. So the first thing here is, why does it not matter that, like, first of all, why make the guy an oceanographer, and then not have it matter in the slightest, right? This could be an exposition machine, right? Like, imagine a movie, and I'm also already rewriting the movie, right? But what if getting to the submarine is about navigating the seafloor, and you guess who comes in handy if you need to navigate the ocean's floor? An oceanographer. It does not happen in the movie. It's just a desert. And that's the next thing that doesn't matter, is that it's the ocean floor. It's just a desert. They did not do anything to make it look like the ocean floor. It's bone dry, even though it was the bottom of the ocean 6 hours ago. Right? It should all be wet at minimum, and it should be drying up over the course of the movie, maybe. But it looks like it's like they just drove. I don't know where they filmed this. Maybe they just went to Morocco or somewhere in northern Africa, just went into the desert and just filmed it, but it's just the desert. There's some fish that are lying around in twice. I think one of the things that science fiction specifically runs on is to make stuff matter, right? Where your fantastical element or your big conceit or something shapes the story in a way that makes it go, and that gives it a unique sense, right? So like in Alien, that's the life cycle of the alien, for example, right? So like an alien story unfolds in a very particular way because it's being driven by the life cycle of the alien, for example, right? Like if you can make the fantastical element matter, then you've got a distinctive story. And they don't do that here, right? It does not matter, like why the ocean disappears does not matter, and it doesn't have to, but it's one way it could matter. That doesn't tie into the story whatsoever. It doesn't matter that what they're walking on is the ocean floor. It could be anything. Like if the story has them be transported to an alternate dimension and they're just in the desert now, same story, no difference, right? And they switch back in a week, and then they're at the bottom of the ocean again, and then so if they're not in a submarine, they die. At every point of this movie, it just neglects to make stuff matter and make it unique or distinctive in any way, shape, or form.
Because it was such a big idea, right? I think they just tried to make things make sense, if that makes sense. Like they wanted the pieces to fit well together, even though it's boring, if that makes sense. Because, for example, like you mentioned the whole point about the submarine only fits 3 people. So killing the dad, even though I was like, killing the dad makes sense. That's okay, cool. That's like a.
It just makes it really obvious that one person has to die.
Exactly.
And guess what? Well, actually, the subversion said 2 people die.
Yeah, well, that's the conflict, right? So they said, okay, let's resolve one conflict by getting the dad killed by this mystery man, by the way, who ends up being like the main threat and not the actual crabs. That's why I said this mystery, like when he came into this, I swear that it was the first half, or at least nearly 60 or 70% of the movie, he was the threat until we didn't even see the crabs. That was my problem. I was like, okay, so the main antagonist should have been the crabs, but we don't even see there isn't even like a hint, or usually in movies, right, you see like a glimpse of the threat near the first act, right? You didn't see the crabs at all in the first act. You saw them near the end of the second act. That's how just how disorganized this movie felt. So it felt like they were just trying to make things make sense rather than investing in creating a good story, which I'm shocked, because you said there was 2 writers in this film. I honestly thought this was created by first-time filmmakers, first-time writers, first-time directors, and that's why I was giving them the benefit of the doubt until you said that these guys have experience. Well, these people could be women. These people have experience. I'm like, whoa, there's no excuse.
It just made no sense. It feels like they've kind of ripped up one script and kind of like slapped it into this one, in terms of like having this particular raider be this like presence like following them throughout the movie. It just generally didn't make sense as to who he was, what he wanted, why he like decided to like follow them for as long as he was following them as well, why he was like so hell-bent on killing them throughout this, because it was also shown that they didn't really have much resources themselves. I think they'd like run out of water that they had. They were kind of like having to like try to make do with sort of what they had, and they didn't really kind of like resupply until they came across like this like cargo container ship. So it was a bit like, what's really the purpose of like us spending this much time following him? And like at first when he first appears and he kills the father, like it took me back. I was like shocked. I was like, oh, like damn, like okay. And then it just like never really materialized into anything that was of interest, or anything that was like maybe like really significant or like really mattered to the story at all. And like the whole time I'm like trying to piece together like why he was acting the way he was acting, and like I'm trying to think, oh, is it because he was like infected by like something under the sea that's like maybe turned him a little bit crazy, or like is there something that's kind of like altered him? Is it going to like potentially change one of the family members? Are they going to have to make like a tough decision on like someone because of like an infection that they have through sort of being at the bottom of the sea? And it was just a bit like, no, he was just this guy just following them. So
I've seen like post-apocalyptic movies that are set, or stories that are set shortly after the collapse, and usually there's at least some remnant of civilization, right? Like where people are maybe stealing or killing, but they feel bad about it because they realize they shouldn't do it, but they have to, right? And like this guy went from regular person to complete Mad Max character in about 6 hours, right? And that's just weird.
Yeah.
And I don't think a point is being made here. I think it's just purely, well, it's a post-apocalyptic movie, and so we need raiders and we need bandits, and that's what we get. Like, I don't think there's any further thought behind it.
It feels like the only reason why they added the whole crabs threat was its selling point to the executive producers and the people who commissioned this film. Because of course you're gonna always need that, idea that catches people's eye. And obviously, Daniel, like, you introduced this to us because you said the crab aspect of things was interesting in this type of setting, right? It was odd, it was weird. I was like, okay, so it makes sense. And that's what kind of attracted us as well. So clearly they just said, you know what, that we just use that to get this movie bought. The main threat is the guy. You know what I'm saying? And unfortunately, they should just did that. If you want us to be honest, I know it wouldn't have probably. I know executive producer probably wouldn't have bought it because there's other movies like that. However, it's false advertising because it just felt like the crabs were just, like you said, fillers. They were just there to, because that's what the synopsis is.
It's just a CGI thing to run away from, right? Nothing else happens because of it. And that's kind of like what I was building up to. It's just stuff happening. They're taking one step after the next, and they have a very linear journey. They need to go from their ship to the submarine, and it's like 2 days away, and there are threats in between, and they overcome the threats, and that's it. There's nobody ever makes a decision. Nobody ever faces a dilemma. Nobody ever needs to make a sacrifice. It's almost like a video game where the game just throws some obstacles at you that you are meant to overcome. And so the entire thing kind of doesn't feel all that exciting because you're supposed to succeed. And this is kind of how this movie felt. Like at no point did I feel like there was anything at stake here.
Yeah.
And I would say like the one time that it felt like there potentially could have been something at stake when sort of like the rocks fell on the family and like there was like the divide between like where the mum was and the children were. Even though as I was watching, I was like, she could probably climb over that. But she was like telling them. And
then she did, pretty much. Right? Like the children just get her back. It's like a minor inconvenience.
Yeah, pretty much, which was going to be my point. It's like they went through all the effort of like trying to get her to sort of like tell her kids, you can go without me, whatever. And then they get to the submarine, and then the daughter just turns back and says, "Here's my hand, just climb over." And it's just like.
But could you argue? Obviously, the reason why. Obviously, we already know why the mum stayed there, because there's only 3 people. Obviously, 3 people that can fit in the submarine. But obviously, the kids don't know that. So
4, and that meant
4.
Yeah. So there's 4 seats on the submarine, but there's 5 people, 4 in the family, 1 for the scientist, and so somebody has to die.
Oh, so that scene was pointless then.
Yes.
As in, like, she should have just climbed it.
Once the father was dead, everything was fine. They were down to 4 people. No further dilemma needed. And it's
know what it feels like? The script feels like writer's block. A bunch when you have writer's block, you just force a scene. Because that's how I feel like sometimes when I'm writing stuff. It honestly feels like that. But it's still annoying because there's 2 experienced writers, which is so flipping annoying. And I think also the reason what made like the story worse was the characters. That was going to be my next question. Is like, were the characters well developed and believable? And for me personally, no, because they lacked chemistry. They lacked. Like, the performance was subpar. It was all right, but I don't necessarily blame them because it's like, firstly, they lack chemistry, and there was pretty much a non-existent character arc for all of them. So there's not really much you can do besides just read your lines on a script.
Yeah, I like them fine in the opening sequence. They were just a regular family, right? They bickered and they were a little bit annoying, but nothing too egregious about it, right? They were just people. And just as a family, I was okay with them. I didn't love them, but they were okay. But then, like, at some point, they have to carry the movie because there's nobody else in the story, right? Like, the scientist now, he's there for 5 seconds, and then the raider has no lines, I don't think. And so they have to carry the entire story. And so because they don't have anything going on and they don't have any arcs, no dilemmas to overcome or resolve, it's just will they get to the destination? The answer is yes. That's the movie.
Yeah.
So if you are a halfway seasoned writer, and none of us are, right? But just if you have a passing interest in stories, you can probably recognize that there are a couple of different ways to do this, right? You can have them overcome an antagonist, which they kind of do, right? There's this raider following them, right? But he's injured, so he's never really at risk of catching up to them unless they go out of their way to not move forward, right? So he's never any real danger. Like, I thought the menace when he actually attacks the boat, where he talks to the father, and then the father offers him some water out of kindness, and then the guy drinks the water and just stabs the father. And I thought that was probably the best scene in the movie, because that was actually a threatening scene. And there was actually a scene where I said, okay, I'm not sure where this goes. And then they have this entire sequence where the children hide in the boat, and the mom kind of tries to get a knife and tries to fight back. And there's like this cat and mouse game, and the guy has a dog, and all of that. That sequence is probably by far the best in the entire movie, because there's actual tension there. We don't know how far they will go. We don't know who will make it out alive and who won't. We've already killed off the fathers, so the movie has shown that it's willing to kill somebody to get rid of characters. And the guy, even though he didn't say anything, just the fact that there's a stranger on your boat with a knife is already decently scary, and the way it was shot was decently suspenseful and all of that. But that was the only time in the movie where I thought the movie knew what it was doing. Almost to the point where they had that scene and said, okay, now we have to turn it into a movie. And now we're out of ideas. That's kind of how it felt, because that scene felt really well developed, but then the rest of the movie didn't.
Do you think that scene, like the introduction of that character and that scene as a whole, should have came after the introduction of the crabs to add to the threat?
I don't know. I think at that point you're making it a completely different movie.
But could you argue that it adds to the threat? Because remember, the selling part of this film is the crabs. That's what the movie should have revolved around. But the movie doesn't revolve around the crabs. It revolves around the actual guy.
I don't know. I'm kind of getting to the point where the only conflicts I can take seriously are internal ones, because those are the ones that can actually have more than one possible outcome. Like it's pretty much guaranteed that they get to the submarine in time, and that they are not all eaten by crabs, right? It's very unlikely that the movie will actually do any of those things, and so there's no real tension there. Like, the actual tension comes from a character having to choose between two things, and they can only choose one, because if they choose one, that rules out the other. So in other words, an internal conflict. And I'm kind of at this point now, if a movie doesn't have an internal conflict, I don't care anymore, because it's almost guaranteed how that will turn out. And like, this movie just didn't even attempt that, right? Like, there was a little bit, like, in terms of the self-sacrifice of the parents in order to save their children, but that also isn't what happened in the story. I think you have to scrap the entire script and start again. And maybe like one way you can create tension is if it's not a raider, but if they hire like a captain, and they've been trusting that captain for a long time, and then suddenly he turns into a threat. Right, for example, right? That would at least be more interesting. But just a random guy showing up with a knife, like yes, that scene is suspenseful, but that's also kind of it. Like, there's nothing else going on where somebody has to make a choice or decision or a trade-off or has to choose between two things, whatever. Like, those are the things that create interesting characters, and those things are free. Like, those things are not more expensive to film. So if you have a low budget, you just do that. Create a setup where somebody has to choose between two things. Like, both children are sick and the mother only has medicine for one. That's a dilemma. And then you make a story. Like, doesn't have to be this, right? But that would be a way to create a dilemma, right? You want to save both children. You only have enough medicine for one. And under normal circumstances, you would just go to a hospital. But now you can't. Now you have to choose. That's a story, right? And I don't see how. Like, I'm just some guy, right? Who talks about movies. Right? I'm not a writer. This is not my career, right? I don't have 20 years of experience, but why can I come up with this and they can't? And my idea is cheaper to film, because the CGI crabs probably cost tens of thousands of euros.
Yeah.
Right?
It's
so
weird.
What's the problem?
Yeah, I don't get how professionals can write a script. It seems like this was like at least the first or second draft. Or maybe the writers wrote it and then the director just completely took certain scenes out and said, I just don't know. It doesn't make sense.
I feel like the fundamental part as well, which they were kind of like missing, was from the title itself. Like, the title of the movie is called Survive. And it's like, okay, for these people that are in this situation, what are they willing to do to survive? How do they survive? Like, there's like loads of different questions you can ask about something like being in the survival situations, and like Daniel was mentioning about like difficult decisions that you'd have to make in those scenarios, and it's like none of that really comes up. Like, the example of like the crew that they run into from like the containers, like, you got to play that differently in terms of they come across them after they've been attacked by the crabs, and they kind of like maybe like welcome them in to kind of start off with, but they understand the threat a little bit more than the family does, so that when the next kind of like wave of attacks come in, they are a little bit more ruthless in terms of like how they deal with it, in terms of like trying to lock themselves in a container. And you can have a situation where, again, like the families kind of come to not trust, but kind of like familiarize themselves with this crew, but then the crew instantly turns on them to kind of like save their own back, essentially. And it's a question on like, people willing to do in like cases of survival and this, that, and the other. And it's like, I don't know, loads of like questions and loads of sort of like cases that are just not really asked in this movie. And again, like Daniel mentioned, it's not about like low budget, it's about just better writing and like trying to just like rework a few things in the script or rework how things play out and just like rework a few lines just to sort of kind of really drive home the whole like purpose of what the movie is meant to be.
And that crew of the container ship is like another example, right? So like I think there's a container ship and there's like these containers scattered across the seafloor. There's a couple of survivors from the crew, right? And the family is being chased by the crabs, right? And they want refuge in the container. The container crew essentially at gunpoint tells them to stay away. So the container crew takes shelter in the container, and then the family climbs on top of the container, and then the crabs just go into the container because there's a massive hole in the side and just eats everybody inside and then leaves. Not only not have a conflict, but the threat removed itself by being a threat. Like there's no ramifications from that following this, right? They even put into us like the only reason they survived the scene is because they were kept out of the container, right? If they had been let into the container by the crew, they would have died.
Yeah.
So it's just a coincidence and just luck that it turned out that way. So why is that an interesting story? It's a halfway tense scene when you watch it without thinking too hard about it, but it's like where is the tension exactly, and what challenge is being overcome? Like fate just conspires for these characters to live.
It also like raises questions about like how these crabs are meant to operate, and it also like raises questions about how they survived after like the raider that was following them sort of kind of like died, and it's shown that his body was like eaten or attacked by like certain animals. It shows that these crabs kind of like have a sense as to like where the humans are, and like even if they like kind of like lock themselves inside a container, the crabs know to kind of go in there, and it's just like these humans weren't really that far away. They were just like in that plane whilst that guy was like his body was outside. So it's a bit like, so why didn't the crabs like sense their presence or like even like go in there and like kill them? I don't know. It's just after I saw that scene, I was just questioning that.
It just lacks any kinds of stakes or cause and effect or decision making, right? It's just stuff that happens and they broadly survive and they're broadly fine. The thing that really bugs me about this movie is that like you go through all of this expense and effort to make a movie, right? You probably spend a year or two of your life, you spend millions of euros, right? And you just do nothing. You just do the most obvious beats. Nobody, like, there's no point to it. Do you not feel bad about it? I guess they get a paycheck, right? I have a lot of respect for like workmen actors who just basically say, look, this is a job and I got hired to do a job and I did it and I didn't watch the movie afterwards. Like when somebody is honest about that, I can kind of respect this. But if you like devote years of your life, if you're the director, if you're the writer, are you not bored by this? Like, is this really the only thing you can do? And then in terms of pointlessness, like when we get to the end, the mother and the two children get to the submarine, and there's a scientist there who just dies conveniently because he's been attacked by the crabs and he dies right after welcoming the protagonists, right? And so the waves start crashing in again, and they just go in and they just operate the thing. Like they don't get crushed under the waves or anything. They just make it to the top. And then they get to the shore and like there's like back to civilization, but it's all destroyed. Which number one, we already knew, right? Because we had this sort of thing about how the oceans go on land, and so the land is flooded and the ocean is dry. Then after a week, it comes crashing down again. So we don't actually get new information when we see all of the land destroyed and flooded, right? And also, it's not a conclusion to anything, right? It's not like they were hoping to come, like, obviously they were hoping to get back to safety, right? And now they see it's destroyed, but that's like literally all there is to it. Maybe I put a little bit too much emphasis on endings, but to me, like, the ending is like the exclamation mark, right? Like, that's the end of the sentence. That's the punchline of the joke. That should make a point of some sort, even if it's just like the catharsis of the heroes have reached like safety or have defeated the villain or whatever, right? That's fine enough. Or they get back to their home after an adventure or something like that. That already is enough for an ending, but it should like have some kind of relevance to what the characters went through and what they were trying to achieve, right? And here it's basically just where you get what you wished for, and it's crap anyway. Tough. Kind of what the movie is saying, right?
I don't
Like
really
it's either
have
that or
much.
nothing.
Yeah. I don't even know what to say. I don't really have much to say about the ending because, like, I understand the themes of the film. Obviously, it's survival, hope,
Do you?
and
I
well,
didn't
it
find
seems like
any.
it's basic themes: family, survival, hope, the fragility of life. But
On a very basic level. The themes were the next ones on my list of things to complain about. But go on.
yeah, so I don't honestly have much to say about the ending because, like, even when the film ended, I was like, wait, the film's finished? Like, that's the resolution? Because the main issue and the main problem I had that they tried to overcome was getting back home. And
And then
it
there
ended
is
with
no hope.
exactly.
How ironic.
Exactly.
This is deep.
But could you argue and say, because wasn't there a
I can argue a
scene
lot of things. Go on.
wasn't there a scene where, because I think her boyfriend, where obviously the girl's crying about her boyfriend, wasn't there a scene where they said that the he's dead because the world's pretty much
Yeah.
ended or something? So you could argue and say, well, there's nowhere to go to because the world's ended. In a way that does
So what?
kind of, it does kind of resolve. It resolved itself already.
There was a very basic irony here, right? Because they try to get to safety, and so they get to safety, but it's destroyed. Okay?
Yeah.
And if you got anything else? But no, like the way it's shot and framed and everything, it makes it seem like they're making a point, right? And throughout the movie, they keep making points, right? They keep talking, like there's this passive-aggressive environmentalism kind of scattered throughout the movie, right? When they first have contact with the scientist, they say something like, I guess the conspiracy theorists were right. And I guess this is nature punishing us or something like that, or Earth defending itself or something like that. Or this is Earth fighting back before we kill it or something like that. Like, there's a couple of lines like this. And then as they are walking through the ocean wasteland, there's like rubbish everywhere. It's like just empty plastic bottles and whatever. And obviously it's exaggerated to make a point, right? But is it making a point? Yes, there is pollution. That's it. Pollution exists. It seems like very safe, very low effort, like social commentary. And if you have your bingo cards ready, this is where you tick off us complaining about lazy social commentary. But it's like it expresses these environmentalist ideas, right? But it only kind of references them, right? It does not, like this. The point of the story has nothing to do with that. You can imagine a version of the story in which the pollution is actually a problem, or the reason why, or the pollution is the reason why they can't make it to the submarine, or the reason why, I don't know, the crabs are so angry, or something, right? Where humanity has engineered its own demise, right? Or we always thought we had more time to clean up the oceans, and we always put it off next year, next decade, next generation, and now time's up, right? There's a whole bunch of different ways, like, and with science fiction, like science fiction does not have high standards for like allegories like this, right? You can be very heavy-handed about this, right? Like Star Trek has an entire movie devoted to like blue whales are psychic and can deflect an alien invader, but we killed all of them because we wrecked the environment. So now we have to travel back in time to get a blue whale to save the world. That's a movie. That's a Star Trek movie, right? That is very like, that's not subtle, right? Like we wrecked the environment and now we no longer have the resources we need to survive. So we have to go through these extreme measures, right? You can imagine a way, like we can imagine like 10 different ways this can, like, you can engineer a story where the pollutedness of the oceans is the actual threat, right? Not the angry crabs, not the raiders, but I don't know. If you brainstorm this for 10 minutes, you can come up with something, right? But it's not. We just reference it, and when we put some empty plastic bottles like in the background, and that's our social commentary.
Just kind of like supplement your point there as well. You even had like the little boy that drinks the water as well in the sea. So that's like a perfect opportunity to add about like the pollution and like the kind of like toxic waste in the ocean as well in that particular scene.
You're right. That would be an opportunity to do it. And so when you look at the reviews, like everywhere, right, it's scathing, right? Like this, everybody's trashing this for good reason. But when you actually read through them and look for some like positives, they talk about how, yeah, this is very biting social commentary, or like this really like draws attention to an important topic and whatever. And I'm like, really? Does it? People have very low standards for this stuff. And that kind of basically, as far as I'm concerned, just means we're not getting better stories like this, because like if the bars were higher and people said, well, like I'm an environmentalist, I'm not impressed. Like you have to try a little bit harder, and like you're not drawing your attention to this because you're stopping at like the 10% mark and you should have driven this further, whatever, right? Like, if that was the response, then I think we would be getting much better stories. Directors and writers do this because they just, like, all you need to do is reference, like, something that everybody agrees on, and then you get celebrated for how amazing your story is. And this is like an example of this, right? Like, this is the most basic, hey, did you know pollution exists, right? And the only reason this really stuck out in me is, number one, the movie does it like 4 or 5 times. And then also it keeps getting mentioned in the reviews. Like, people actually looked at this and said, yeah, that's like the movie's one saving grace. And it just drives me crazy.
I see where you're coming from. But at the same time, you could argue and say that, listen, because their motivation was already at a low, because their budget was at a low. So in a way, you could argue that, should we really go into that much effort with the story, do like the actual research and try and impress these, like, for example, environmentalists, should we? Do you know what I'm saying? So you could kind of argue that, okay, this is what we're getting for this piece of work, so let's not really go. And like you said, the standard is already low, so you don't really have to go above and beyond if they don't want to. At the same time, it's like, all right, cool, you're going to be responsible for a rubbish film. That's going to go under your portfolio. So
yeah. And the reason that I keep harping on about this is, like, it's every movie.
Yeah.
Like, every movie does this. Like, we had this in Wicked, where it had the most superficial commentary about its topic, but everybody, like, when I sat in a full theater and people around me were applauding at how brave it was, right? But it's not. It's a very basic treatment of this important topic, but it's very basic and doesn't have any insights or does not push any envelopes or anything. It's just reaffirming the most basic idea. And this kind of did even less than that, right? It just, on a very basic level, mentioned that pollution exists. And that was kind of the degree to which it kind of took a stance.
Well, could you argue and say that they might have been scared? Because sometimes when, there's social commentary, there is always that fear that you don't want to kind of like shove it down their throats.
Well, it's like a middle ground between being basic and being preachy. Right? You can actually be interesting, right? You can actually have something to say. You can actually take this somewhere. I'm trying to think of an example of this, but like science fiction lends itself to this, right? Where you can create any kind of reality you want, and that can then be your allegory or the point you're trying to make. Or you can even just leave it at a very basic level, but then use that as kind of a foundation for a character conflict or something, right? This is not the movie's problem, right? It's just, given that there's pretty much nothing else going on, it kind of just stuck out because they go to that well like 5 times, and it's kind of just sprinkled into the dialogue in a very superficial and hand-wavy way. Like, I'm not even sure what, I guess, the conspiracy theorists were right even means. Does that mean like that, I don't know, like doomsday, like people who predict doomsday are actually right and we should listen to them? Is that what the movie's saying? Or is it saying nothing at all? It's just saying something that kind of vaguely sounds like it's pushing some kind of envelope. Again, not the main problem with this movie. It's just, what else is there to latch onto, really, right?
I am going to go more to like, a positive note. But kind of quickly, because I was going to ask you guys, like, how did you kind of like feel about the premise of like, this world-ending event causing the ocean to recede? How did you feel about it, and how would you kind of compare that idea with other disaster movies?
So I think the specifics of how the world ends is pretty much always going to be nonsense, in the sense of doesn't actually hold water in terms of actually being realistic or being like a scenario that really would work out that way. Like in very few movies does the scenario actually hold water, and I think the same is true for like dystopian science fiction as well. Like the exact ways in which the society is broken or oppressive, whatever, does not actually map to actual reality, and so judging it by realism standards is kind of not really the point. So I went into this movie not expecting that to be the case. I just figured, well, it's going to be something that kind of just in 2 sentences explains why the oceans are gone. And then the story happens, right? The why is not the important part. It's not going to be part of the story. It's not going to drive anything that happens or what the characters are about. It's just it's the very basic post-apocalyptic template of we take normal people, everyday people, and then we strip away all of like the comforts of civilization, and then we make them survive. Like people who never thought they would have to struggle for survival suddenly have to survive. Like that's a lot of the appeal of the post-apocalyptic genre, of the zombie genre, of like things like that, right? Like this whole, I would thrive once the rules are all taken away, kind of that fantasy in many cases. Or this anxiety of what if I suddenly had to think about where my food and my water and my medicine comes from, stuff like that, right? So I've never expected the scenario to be interesting. And it could really be anything, right? All it really says is the water's gone and it'll be back in a week. That's all there is to it. Like nothing else. Like the story itself is not informed by this. Like and all the dialogue that we get about like why this is happening, it's just window dressing. It's just purely, hey, we have this idea of what if the oceans are gone. But like it does not explore like global weather should be all messed up because suddenly all the water's gone. Like something, right? Like if you really thought this through of what would actually happen if all the oceans disappeared, like from 1 minute to the next. It wouldn't just be like there's now a desert where the ocean used to be. That would actually be all sorts of ramifications. And you can imagine like a hard science fiction story that basically explores that. Says, okay, what does weather look like when this is the case or something? Or I don't know, like where do we get our drinking water from when there's no more rain or what? Like you can imagine something, right? And so to me, like this never really factored into the story because I figured it was just a way to get a survival story about murder crabs. And that's really all it needed to do. And every line they spend on the justification is one too many. Like, I think you either really make it work or you hand wave it completely and just say this happened. We don't know why. Ocean's gone. What now? Right? And I think they kind of choose the worst of all worlds where they actually spend a fair amount of time on it. But all their explanations are nonsense. And we know from the start that they're nonsense. So just don't do anything at all because like these people don't have any information, right? All they can see is the ocean's gone. And I think actually that aids the suspension of disbelief when the characters just say, we don't know what happened, but it clearly did. Look, I'm looking outside the window and there should be an ocean and there's no ocean, right? Like even if it makes zero sense, like if characters react to it in a believable, matter-of-fact way, that makes it more believable. Not that this was actually happened, but that the characters are real people who happen to be in this unbelievable situation. Like this is not a disaster. It's like if we had like a 10-minute sequence where they explain all the bullshit science that goes into this, then that would be even worse. But as it stands, we just get a couple of lines that are just a waste of time. So my preference is either really make it work and then go into detail, or just have it happen and then we ask what happens next.
Let's try it on a positive. So was there any highlight moments, anything that surprised you about the film that you liked? Please, let's try.
I think Daniel touched on it when he was talking about when the father was murdered. I feel like that genuinely had like an element of surprise and like not expecting that to happen in this movie. It really like kind of like took me back and just kind of like had that sense of like, okay, like, you know, what other like surprises are in store? Like, you know, this story can kind of go anywhere. Like, you know, anything can really happen. But it doesn't really like lead to anything. But I feel like for that moment, the movie actually got like some type of emotion out of me, some type of like kind of like reaction out of me. Whereas the rest of it, I was kind of like just rolling my eyes. So I'll give it that positive.
That entire scene where the guy is stalking the boat and they're hiding and trying to get the jump on him and all of that, that was decently suspenseful. One thing I kind of wanted to mention was that there was this, did you guys notice this really weird repetition with the daughter where there are certain things she does twice. So she twice almost causes the death of her parents, right? So when the mom drowns before the disaster happens, she's got her back turned to the sea and she's listening to her, I don't know what it is, I don't know if it's a Discman, if it's an MP3 player, whatever. None of those things exist anymore anyway, but like she's listening to music, right? And so she doesn't see that her mom needs help. And then the same thing happens when the raider shows up and the dad is negotiating, is getting attacked. She also has her back turned and is listening to music. It seems like a point is being made, right? Like these are like she's clinging on to like the distractions of civilization. Yeah. And she has not adapted to the new situation, to the new realities of survival. Right? You would think so, right? It kind of looks like it. But does it? Or is it just something they put in twice?
No, I can see how like it could lead to something, and it could be some type of commentary in terms of sort of the distractions of like the newer generation and like kind of like not being aware of your surroundings and like kind of like, you know, being consumed by kind of like your technology and all the distractions that are kind of like available and stuff like that. But I don't think it really has there isn't any like learnings from it. It doesn't seem there isn't like any kind of like significant story sort of developments from it. From what I saw, anyways.
Here's what's missing: a third scene where the brother's in danger, and she's got her back turned, but she's not listening to music, and so she hears they cry for help, and so now this time she helps.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's called an arc.
Yeah.
Right. That's
Not
what's missing, and I wonder if that was cut. I wonder if that was in there at some point where I say, okay, she endangers both of her parents, once fatally because she's too distracted by the distractions of civilization, and the third time those have been stripped away, so this time she cares about her family.
Yeah, and what's even worse is that she almost gets attacked by the raider as well, by again not being really aware of her surroundings. And I'm not really sure how you can kind of like step out and like look into the vastness and not see the raider appearing. Again, like they don't really kind of like paint the ocean or sea anything sort of like too complex outside of like just being like an open desert or whatever. But yeah, that would have been like the perfect opportunity. Maybe it could have been like her brother that went out for like a sequel, or they both went out at the same time, and then like, you know, as she's about to go or whatever like that, she kind of like is aware that he's about to be attacked and saves the day or something like that. But yeah, for sure that's like missing in her character.
Even just hearing her cry for help would be enough. That would break the cycle. Another thing she does twice is she vomits twice. Once in the boat. I think it's when, like, during the storm, when they're in the boat and they're kind of the seas are rough. She vomits once, right? So I think she puts on the life vest, and then because of the seasickness, she vomits, right? And then she does it again on the submarine, like when they're in safety and the water keeps crushing back in and they're being shaken up a little bit. She vomits again. Why do it twice? Right? Like, if you do it twice, that's a stylistic device. Like, what are you saying? Okay, let's brainstorm this. What is the saying?
Genuinely, I couldn't even think of anything that they could be saying with her being sick twice on a boat.
Despite everything, she's still who she used to be.
Potentially.
I don't think there was a message behind it. I just think, because you know when you vomit once, you think it's
no, but it's fun to imagine one. Like, because like when you do put this kind of repetition in a movie, it usually means something.
Yeah.
Right, and it's also identical, right? Like it's the same character, same circumstances, same reaction. You signify that an arc has happened, or the character has had some kind of teachable moment, has learned some kind of lesson by having them react differently this time when being put in the same situation. Or there's some kind of irony, or we show maturity, or we show that this person has grown, or whatever, right? Like a number of things. Now that I think of it, like, shouldn't she have almost vomited the second time and then overcome it? Because now she's toughened up and she's learned, she's experienced some things, and she's no longer the child.
That's asking for more stuff in the story to be there that wasn't there.
Here's my question: why can I think of this and they can't? I'm not that smart.
Maybe they did phone it in, to be honest. Maybe after doing it for 20 years and it's just a job for them, and they just kind of like churned out whatever script. And you know what? I'm not too mad at them for doing that. If that is the case, it's like, okay, like, you're just getting your paycheck.
I want to start a Twitter campaign about hashtag Cassie vomit. Let's get this going. I want to know. I want to get to the bottom of this.
Hi man, I tried to end this on a positive note. Well, is there anything else you guys want to say before we go to last sports?
I'm done. Oh yeah, people don't like bilingual families, I've learned. Like, one of the
I
things,
like this. I don't know why they hate.
Me too. Like I grew up around multiple bilingual families. This is how they talk. They switch between languages, and like one parent uses one language, another parent uses another language, and the children switch sometimes in the same sentence, depending on who they talk to, and like the switching between English and French. Never mind that the father is German, so that should have been German and French, but forget about that. This is how bilingual families work, and I don't think I've ever seen one on TV, like one in a movie. And that was actually kind of interesting.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that as well. When it comes to like my highlights, I think that's what was the most engaging thing for me, because obviously it was relatable. So when I was reading the reviews as well, they were complaining about that. I said, flipping out, guys.
Why are they talking foreign? I don't like it.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. Well, guys, last sports.
Probably a big waste of time. You know, not really much going on here. Not really much you can kind of like pull from the story, the premise, the idea, sort of like the threat, the kind of like tenseness. There's like literally nothing really here, to be honest. Pretty much a waste of time, to be fair. So on that note, I will give it a 2 out of 10.
For me, yeah, it wouldn't be a film that I'd watch again. Would it be a film that I'd recommend? I'd say if you had nothing to watch, like nothing, and you would, I would
Go
say,
out. If you have nothing else to watch, just go outside, go touch some grass or something.
yeah. I don't think it was that bad. Like I say, it had its moments. You know what I'm saying?
It actually wasn't like terrible. Like it wasn't like offensive. It wasn't like agonizing.
Yeah.
It was just nothing.
Yeah, that's what it's like. It's a nothing type of film. Like it was just a nothing type of film. I don't even know if I don't know how I feel about this movie. Like I would rate this film a 4.5 out of 10. Like I said, it had its moments, which is giving it that rating. Like I said, the use of that whole bilingual scenes, that was engaging for me. The filmmaking looked solid. The visuals looked solid.
It's not an ugly movie.
Yeah, exactly. And I do give them credit for trying to create a movie out of a wacky idea. But like I said, overall, based on what we've said, it just wasn't, the story just wasn't cohesive, and it was just felt like it was all over the place. And pretty much what you're advertised is not what you're gonna watch. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I'm giving this one a 4.5 out of 10.
Yeah, so I think this is just a whole bunch of nothing. Like this is like maybe some kind of contractual obligation or something. There's nothing of merit here to really get enjoyed. I actually got a fair amount of enjoyment out of just picking apart, just like making a list of all the missed opportunities and all the mistakes, and imagining like how can you fix this at no cost, right? Like practical fixes that they could have just done on the day and stuff like that. And I think we got a fun conversation out of this. Like sometimes just doing an autopsy on a movie can be fun in itself. It's not like a train wreck like some movies we've talked about. It's just complete amateur hour, and that's kind of interesting by itself. Like why even make this outside of the paycheck? So I'm giving this a Rien out of 5.
Cheeky. All right, guys. Well, thank you very much for tuning into today's discussion.
If you liked what you saw, tell a friend. If you hated it, tell an enemy.
That's catchy. If you like it, tell a friend. If you hate it, tell an enemy. That's about it. Okay.
That's it.
You heard it here first.
Stole this from a podcast I listened to 15 years ago. I don't think the guy minds.
All right, guys. Thank you very much for tuning in today. We'll catch you next week. Au revoir.
Bye-bye.